everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Sheer, your AEC Tech Girl, and this is part 5 of our Getting Started with Dynamo for Revit series. Today we're diving into accessing Revit Geometry, selecting elements, getting linked elements, and creating Revit elements all using Dynamo. If you haven't seen the previous parts, make sure to check them out in the playlist linked above. Up until now, we have reviewed a lot of basics of Dynamo, which had nothing to do with Revit, but Dynamo was originally created for use with Revit, and Dynamo offers a whole suite of nodes specifically designed for Revit. Let's get started. First, let's talk about accessing Revit Geometry. In Dynamo, accessing geometry from your Revit model is a fundamental step for any automation or scripting task. To begin, we'll go to our Dynamo library and expand Revit. The Revit library is what we will need to access all things Revit. Then we'll expand selection. When thinking about selection, there are 3 main options for selecting Revit elements. The first option is selecting by Revit hierarchy. Let's pause for a moment on selecting elements and give a 15-second review of the Revit hierarchy. Okay, at the top, we have our category, then family, then type, and lastly, instance. All right, that's the hierarchy. Let's get back to it. The selection sub-library is organized alphabetically, so all options are not grouped together, but the selection by Revit hierarchy nodes are mostly at the top. We have 6 different nodes for that. All elements at a level, all elements of a category, all elements of a category in view, all elements of class, all elements of a family type, elements by ID, and get family parameter. The second option is to select elements by a drop-down menu. There are lots of different menu options to choose from in your default Dynamo library, which is reading the elements from your active Revit model. There is a drop-down for categories, ceiling types, element classes, family types, floor types, levels, roof types, sheets, structural column types, structural framing types, view family types, wall types, and views. The third option is selecting elements by what is called point and click, because you are simply going to your Revit model and clicking on the elements or drag selecting in the view. Just ignore the warnings for now. It's because I haven't actually selected elements for those nodes yet. We have the option to pick family instance, pick model elements, select divided surface families, select edge, select face, select faces, select family instance, select family instances, select model element, select model element by category, select model elements, select model elements by category, select point on face, select reference on element, and select UV on face. There is one other node in the Revit selection sub-library that I don't think belongs in any of these options, which is the selecting rooms by status node. So now that we have all of our selection nodes, let's use some of them to select different things in our model. We won't try all of them out, but we will try some, and you can play around with the others later on. Now, I'm currently in Revit 2025 Snowden sample model for reference if you're following along. Some of these nodes work together to select things in the model. So let's look at our first option to select an element by Revit hierarchy and grab all elements of a category. We just require one input here, which is a Revit category. We will actually use one of our drop-down menus for this, our categories drop-down menu. Let's select the Windows category. Now connect the output port of our categories node to our input port of all elements of a category. Now you can see a list generated of all the windows in the project. Here's a note. You might think you could simply use a string node and type out the name of the category, but if you try this, you will get a warning that it doesn't work. This is because it doesn't just need the name of the category, but the ID of the category. Everything in Revit can be identified by a unique ID number. Now the drop-down menu is automatically getting that ID, so you don't have to worry about it. You will also notice that each element in the list has its own unique ID represented next to the type name. Another note I want to show is the all elements of a category by view and how to get the active view or just a different view in the model. We will need the categories node again, and I will just use Control on my keyboard to drag and copy the node. Okay, one input is completed. Now let's focus on the view. So we could use the view dropdown as well, which will show us a list of all the views in the model. This can be helpful, but sometimes it isn't always the best. For example, it doesn't show what type of view it is. So if I have views of different types with the same name, like all of these L4 views, I can't really differentiate which is which without doing some other work to determine the type. These can be very useful if you always want to get the data from the same view that isn't always the view that is active. But another method I usually use is to get the element of the active view. In this case, we need to find a node to get our active view from our document. I will then go to Application, then Document in my library. And here is an active view node. But you will notice that it's a query node by the question mark symbol on the left of it. Remember how I like to work backwards? Now that we have our active view node, it's asking us for the document. Right below the active view node is the current document node. I will grab that. This node has no input, so I know that's actually my start point. Let's connect them all. Now you can see the difference when selecting these elements by a view or by the active view. Okay, so we played around with getting Revit elements by hierarchy and by using our drop-down nodes. Let's now try some of our point and click nodes. I want to show you the difference between select model element, select model elements, and select model elements by category. Let's grab all three of those nodes and three watch nodes and attach them. I'll use the quick search method to grab those watch nodes. Let's first select model element. This will allow you to select one element in the model. All of these nodes work by first using the button on the node to select, then navigating to Revit and selecting the element in your view. You can see once I select an element, it instantly updates in my node and watch. This is also because I have Dynamo set to automatic at the bottom. Now let's select model elements. This is the same as the previous, but you are now able to select more than one element. Again, start off by clicking on the button to select, then navigate to Revit and either select one by one, or you can also drag select. Now we see a list of all elements we selected. The next node, Select Model Element by Category, simply adds a category filter so you can only select the elements of that category. First, use the drop-down on the node to select a category, like doors, let's say. Then you can use the Select button, like we did before, and then select in the Revit view. You will notice that now you can only select doors. Once you finish selecting, you will have to use the checkbox on your Modify ribbon to finish your selection. It's exciting to start being able to use Dynamo to interact with your Revit model, isn't it? Now that we selected elements in our model, let's explore a new feature in Revit 2025, selecting linked elements. This is a game changer for working with complex models that include linked files. If you saw my What's New in Revit 2025 video, then you will remember me showing off the new nodes for getting information from a linked model. But let's look specifically at the nodes to select elements from a linked Revit model. Here I have a structural model linked into my architectural model. We will go to our Revit library, then Elements, then scroll down to the link instance. These nodes are similar to our options for selecting elements by Revit hierarchy. We have all elements at a level, all elements of a category, all elements of a category in view, all elements of class, by name, by title, and elements by ID. Let's give some of these a try. I will start by all elements of a category, which will be similar to what we just tried, except we are getting the elements of the linked Revit model instead of the host model. We will grab a watch node to see the results before getting started and connect them. Okay, now let's take a look at what inputs we need. We have two inputs, link instance and category. Let's start off with the first one, link instance. We'll go to Application, then Document. There is a link instance node. Okay, now we need a document. This is the same as what we had before when getting the active view. So we can get the current document node. Now we just need our category. We can use the same drop-down node that we used previously for selecting a category. I will choose structural column since we are getting elements from the linked structural model. Once connected, the linked elements are accessible, just like elements in the host model. This feature is incredibly useful for coordinating across multiple models and extracting necessary data. Finally, let's create some Revit geometry. Dynamo allows us to create new geometry directly in Revit. There are plenty of nodes for creating Revit geometry as well. If we look at Revit and then Element, you will notice all types of sub-libraries here. There are lots of options, including a variety of Revit categories listed. Within each category, there are different options for creating geometry. They are designated with the plus symbol to create data. There are nodes to create adaptive components, ceilings, curtain systems, direct shapes, floors, forms, roofs, rooms, spaces, structural framing, topography, toposolids, which is new in 2025, and walls. You can also create other elements such as dimensions, materials, parameters, revisions, tags, text, etc. But in this episode, I want to focus just on the geometry. So for this example of creating geometry, we will create some floors from our rooms so that the floors have the same boundary as the room. This is a great option for creating finished floors. Let's again work backwards and build out our inputs. We know we want to create a floor, so let's go to Revit, Elements, then Floors. We have two nodes to create floors. They are both named the same, but there is a slight difference. One requires individual curves that create the outline, while the other requires a polycurve for the outline. We will use the first option for outline curves. We need three inputs: the outline curves, the floor type, and the level. Before we continue, let's freeze our node. This will allow us to get all our inputs correct before the node actually runs. Let's start off easy. For both the level and the floor type, we can use our selection by drop-down nodes. We will go to Revit, Selection, then get the levels and floor types nodes. I will select level 1, and for the floor type, this one with the wood floor looks good, but feel free to select whatever you want if you are following along. Next, we are going to need our outline curves, and we know we are getting that from our rooms. Let's explore a bit and go to Revit, Elements, Rooms. It is really important to familiarize yourself with where things are in the library because you will never remember every single node there is. I know I don't, but when I am stuck, I just start exploring the library to see what there is and if I can use it for what I'm trying to achieve. Here you can see what nodes are available for rooms. There are a few options to get the boundary of the room. Let's grab the core boundary. Now we need to select the rooms. You can do this with a few different options from the Revit selection menu that I showed earlier in this episode. I like to use the select model elements by category. Now we can connect all our nodes. Next, use the drop-down to pick rooms as the category, and then use the select button to select the rooms we want to create floors for. Remember to select the checkbox at the top. I forget this sometimes and stumble on how to end this action. This also changed location from Revit 2024 to Revit 2025, so make note of that. Lastly, we will unfreeze our node and watch what happens. Our floors were created. Now go ahead and have some fun with some other options to select Revit elements and create Revit elements. Let your imagination go wild. Well, there you have it. We've covered how to access Revit geometry, selecting elements, getting linked elements, and creating new Revit elements using Dynamo. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel for more Dynamo for Revit tutorials. Also, let me know in the comments what topics you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay empowered, stay inspired, and always challenge what is possible.